Hello, dear friends. Gather close and let me tell you a tale from the wild heart of the Old West, where the snow falls heavy and the soul's strength is tested. It's a story of Eli, a Navajo man broken by betrayal, left to die in a winter storm, and of Clara, a widow whose heart has known its own sorrows. Together, with two children caught in the middle, they find something unexpected, a family forged not by blood, but by courage and promises kept. Pull up a seat, and let's walk this snowy trail together, through grief and hope, to a place where spring might just bloom again. The San Juan Mountains stood like silent sentinels, their peaks cloaked in a relentless snow that fell as if the sky wept for the earth below. Thick, heavy flakes drifted down, blanketing trails, fields, and the red-boned canyons that usually defied winter's grip. The wind sang a mournful tune, low and keening, carrying whispers of storms yet to come. In this bitter season, when men clung to their hearths, and the world seemed to hold its breath, Eli's life shattered like ice under a hammer. Eli was 32, the youngest son of a revered Navajo chief whose land stretched beyond the horizon, farther than a horse could gallop in a day. His broad shoulders and steady hands marked him as a man of strength, but it was his quiet judgment, his eyes that saw beyond anger or pride, that set him apart. His father, Tahoma, had chosen him, not Torin, the eldest with his booming voice, nor Cale, the middle son, with his cunning smile, but Eli, the one who listened to the wind and read the land like a sacred text. This choice, announced in the council lodge under the flicker of firelight, planted a seed of jealousy in his brothers' hearts, a thorn that grew sharp and poisonous. Eli felt the weight of their envy, but never spoke of it. He loved his brothers even as their glances grew colder, their words sharper. On this winter journey, returning from a council with neighboring tribes, he rode ahead of the wagon, his breath clouding in the frigid air. His wife, Naya, sat bundled in furs, her dark hair escaping in wisps to dance with the wind. Their daughter, Lila, 5 years old, slept against her mother's chest, her small face peaceful, unaware of the storm's hunger. Eli's heart swelled at the sight of them, a warmth that held the cold at bay. He hummed a Navajo lullaby under his breath, the same one Nia sang to Lila at night, its rhythm matching the crunch of his horse's hooves in the snow. The trail was narrow, the snow packed hard by earlier wagons. Eli's eyes scanned the horizon, alert for wolves or shifting ice. He did not see Torin and Cale slip away at dawn, their knives glinting as they worked in the shadow of the pines. The betrayal came without warning, a sound sharp as a rifle shot. The wagon's axles snapped and the world tilted. Horses screamed, their hooves thrashing in panic. Eli spun in his saddle, his heart lurching as the wagon pitched sideways, teetering on the ravine's edge. Nia's eyes met his, wide with terror, her hand reaching out as if she could pull him to her. "Eli!" she cried, her voice swallowed by the wind. Then the wagon fell, tumbling into the white abyss below. Eli's scream tore from his throat, raw and useless. He leaped from his horse, scrambling down the icy slope, his boots slipping, rocks slicing his legs until blood seeped through his trousers. The wind stung his face, but he felt nothing except the dread clawing at his chest. At the bottom, the wagon lay shattered, its wooden ribs splintered like broken bones. Nia was still, her face pale as the snow, her hand outstretched, as if reaching for him even in death. Lila lay beside her, her small body crumpled, her eyes closed as if asleep. Eli fell to his knees, a sob choking him. He gathered them in his arms, pressing his face to Nia's cold cheek, whispering her name as if it could call her back. Lila's tiny hand was limp in his, her laughter silenced forever. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. "No, no, no." The word became a prayer, a plea, a curse against the sky. He rocked them, snow clinging to his hair, his tears freezing on his cheeks. The silence of the canyon was deafening, broken only by the wind's cruel moan. He dug through the night, his fingers splitting against the frozen earth, blood mixing with snow. Each handful of dirt felt like a betrayal, as if burying them meant accepting they were gone. He laid Naya and Lila side by side, covering them with stones and snow, their grave a fragile shield against the world's indifference. He pressed his forehead to the mound, whispering Navajo prayers, words meant to guide their spirits to the stars. But the stars were hidden, and the prayers felt empty. Dawn broke, gray and merciless. Eli rose, his body trembling, a gash along his ribs bleeding through his coat. He knew his brother's hands in this. The axle's break was too clean, the cuts deliberate. Rage burned in his chest, but grief was heavier, a stone that threatened to crush him. He stumbled away from the grave, not toward vengeance, but survival. Driven by a promise he'd made to Nia years ago under a summer sky. To live. Always, for her and Lila, for 3 days. He wandered, half-blind in the storm. He chewed bitter bark, drank melted snow, and pressed his hand to his wound, willing his heart to keep beating. Memories haunted him. Lila chasing fireflies, her laughter bright as bells. Nia grinding corn, her voice weaving songs of their people. They came to him like spirits, urging him forward, though his legs shook and his vision blurred. Wolves trailed him once, their yellow eyes glinting in the dusk, but they turned away, sensing death's shadow already on him. Each step was a battle, each breath a defiance against the cold that wanted to claim him. On the 4th day, his strength gave out. He staggered into a shallow valley, where a rough-hewn fence line stood against the snow. A small cabin sat in the distance, smoke curling from its chimney like a faint promise of life. Eli tried to call out, his voice a hoarse whisper lost to the wind. His knees buckled and he fell, the snow rising around him soft and merciless. Darkness swept in, and he thought of Nia's face, her smile fading into the white. Eli's heart slowed, his breath shallow. In that moment he felt not fear but sorrow, a longing to live, not for himself, but for the love he'd lost. The snow buried him, and he surrendered to its embrace, unsure if he would wake again. Clara Hensley stood at the edge of her small porch, her breath clouding in the morning air as she watched the snow fall. At 33, she was a widow, her face etched with lines of endurance rather than joy. Her husband, Jacob, had died 2 years ago, leaving her a farm too small to thrive and debts too large to bear. She managed, by sheer will, each day folding into the next with the weight of survival. Her hands, rough from work, gripped the bucket of water she carried, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. The valley was silent, save for the creak of the fence posts under the snow's burden. Her son, Ben, 10 years old, burst through the drifts, his face flushed from running. "Ma, there's someone by the posts," he said, his voice sharp with urgency. He clutched his hatchet, a boy playing at manhood, his dark eyes wide with worry. Clara set the bucket down, her heart quickening. "A man? Alive?" "He's down," Ben said. "Might be dead." Clara's stomach twisted. Trouble was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her daughter, Sophie, 5, tugged at her skirt, her small face solemn. "We can't leave him, Ma. He'll freeze." Her voice was clear, unwavering, and it cut through Clara's hesitation like a blade. Jacob had taught her to turn no one away, even when it cost them. She grabbed a rope from the shed, her boots sinking into the snow as she followed Ben to the fence line. They found him face down, half buried, his dark hair crusted with ice, his coat torn and soaked with blood. Clara knelt, her fingers trembling as she pressed them to his neck. A faint pulse flickered beneath cold skin, fragile as a candle in a storm. "He's alive," she murmured, relief and fear tangling in her chest. "Ben, help me turn him." Together they rolled him onto the sled used for firewood, his weight heavy with the limpness of near death. He groaned, a low sound of pain, and Clara's heart lurched. She didn't know this man, but his suffering was real, and it tethered her to him in a way she couldn't explain. The trek back to the cabin was grueling, the sled sinking into the drifts. Sophie held the door open, her eyes round as coins, her rag doll clutched tight. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and boiled beans, the stove's warmth a small defiance against the cold. They laid him on a cot near the fire, the best warmth they had. Clara cut away his frozen coat, her hands steady despite the knot in her throat. The wound on his side was deep, ugly, poorly bound days ago and torn open by his journey. She boiled water, steeped sage and cedar bark, herbs Jacob had once gathered, and tore an old quilt into strips. As she pressed the bandages to his wound, he flinched, his breath hitching, but his eyes stayed closed. Ben stood back, arms crossed, his young face hard with suspicion. He's Navajo, Ma. Neighbors say they raid up in the hills. He's hurt, Clara said, her voice firm but soft. No man's an enemy when he's bleeding. She met Ben's eyes, seeing Jacob's stubbornness in them, and her heart ached for the boy who carried too much too young. Sophie knelt by the cot, her doll pressed to her chest. Is he going to die, Ma? She whispered, her voice trembling with a child's fear of loss. Clara's hands paused, the weight of the question pressing against her. She thought of Jacob, pale and still in his coffin, and the nights she'd lain awake, wondering how to shield her children from a world so quick to take. I don't know, Sophie, she said honestly, but we'll try to keep him. Night fell, the storm rattling the shutters like a restless spirit. Clara sat by the fire, her sewing basket untouched, her eyes fixed on the stranger. His chest rose unevenly, his face glistening with fever. She didn't know his name, his story, or why fate had brought him to her fence. But as the wind howled, she felt a stirring in her soul, a whisper of duty that went beyond reason. She prayed, not with words, but with the quiet resolve of a woman who had lost too much to let another life slip away. Lord, don't let him die under my roof, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. Ben slept fitfully on his pallet, his hatchet close. Sophie curled near the cot, humming a lullaby, as if her small voice could anchor the stranger to life. Clara stayed awake, her hands clasped tight, the firelight casting shadows across her face. She thought of Jacob's laughter, his promises, and the debts that outlived him. This stranger was not her burden, yet she felt him tethered to her, a thread of fate she could not cut. The night stretched on, and Clara held vigil, her heart heavy with the weight of hope and fear. Morning broke, the storm easing into a heavy silence. The valley lay buried in white, the cabin's chimney smoke a defiant curl against the cold. Clara rose early, as always, tending the fire, setting beans to simmer. Her eyes strayed to the stranger on the cot. His fever burned hot, his skin glistening, his breath uneven. She touched his forehead, her fingers cool against his heat, and murmured, "Still alive." The words were a prayer, a plea to the universe to spare him. Ben was awake, sharpening his knife at the table, his movements deliberate, his eyes sharp. "He doesn't look like he'll last," he said, his voice flat but edged with worry he wouldn't admit. Clara shot him a look. "Don't speak death over him, Ben, not where he can hear." "He's Navajo," Ben said, his jaw tight. "If he wakes angry, he'll bring trouble." Clara's hand stilled on the bandage she was preparing. "A hurt man's no enemy, Ben. He's just a man. Remember that." Her voice was firm, but inside she wrestled with the same fear. Neighbors whispered of raids, of blood in the high country. To harbor a Navajo could invite ruin, yet she couldn't turn him away. Not after Jacob, not after the promises she'd made to herself to be better than the world's cruelty. Sophie sat cross-legged by the cot, her doll in her lap, humming softly. "He's dreaming," she whispered, her eyes bright with wonder. "I think he hears me." Clara watched her daughter, marveling at the child's faith in a stranger. Sophie's heart was open, untouched by the losses that had hardened Clara and Ben. It was a gift, and it broke Clara's heart to know how fragile it was. Through the day, they tended him in turns. Clara changed his bandages, the wound less angry but still deep. Ben split wood, the crack of his axe echoing like a heartbeat. Sophie whispered to her doll, her voice a soft thread in the cabin's quiet. The stranger stirred once, his lips moving, a Navajo word spilling out, a prayer, a name Clara couldn't tell. Sophie tilted her head, as if she could understand, and Clara's chest tightened with a mix of awe and fear for her daughter's tenderness. By evening, weariness settled over them. Ben's eyes were heavy, though he fought sleep, his knife still in hand. Sophie curled against Clara, her warmth a small comfort. The stranger's fever held, sweat soaking the quilt. Clara sat close, her sewing forgotten, her gaze fixed on his face. It was strong, handsome in its severe way, but drawn tight with pain. She wondered who he was, what ghosts he carried. If death came for him, she would meet it awake, defiant. Near midnight, he stirred violently, his blue eyes, startling against his dark face, flashing open. He gasped, half rising, then fell back, pain pinning him to the cot. His gaze darted across the room, wild, disoriented, landing on Clara's steady eyes, Ben's guarded stare, Sophie's wide-eyed wonder. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken questions. "Where am I?" he rasped, his voice rough as gravel. "My home," Clara said, leaning forward. "You collapsed by the fence." "You're safe," he blinked, wincing, his eyes flicking to Ben's knife, Sophie's doll. "Why help me?" Sophie answered, her voice clear as a bell. "'Cause you'd freeze if we didn't." A breath escaped him, almost a laugh, and something softened in his face. He closed his eyes, his chest rising steadier now. Clara exhaled, her heart easing. "He's awake," she whispered, relief flooding her like warmth from the stove. She hadn't realized how much she'd feared his death until that moment. The next morning, he woke again, clearer. Clara brought him water, steadying the cup as he drank in small sips. His hands shook, but his eyes were sharp. "I'm Clara Hensley," she said. "This is Ben, and that's Sophie. Eli," he said simply, his voice stronger. "Thank you." "You speak English well," Clara noted, curious despite herself. "Scouted for the army," he said, wincing as he shifted. "Listened more than I spoke," Clara nodded, sensing a story he wasn't ready to share. She didn't press. That night, as the children slept, she sat by the fire watching him. His presence shifted the cabin's air like a stone dropped into still water. She thought of Jacob, of the nights she'd sat alone, grieving a man who'd left her with debts and dreams unfulfilled. Eli was a stranger, yet his survival felt like a small victory, a defiance against the world's weight. She prayed again, not for his life alone, but for the strength to carry whatever his presence would bring. Eli's healing was slow, a battle fought in small victories. By the second week, he was splitting wood outside, his movements careful, sweat beading on his brow despite the cold. Clara watched from the porch, her hands wrapped around a mug of weak tea, her heart torn between gratitude and unease. His presence eased the children's burdens, Ben's endless chores, Sophie's quiet loneliness, but it also brought questions she couldn't answer. Who was he? What ghosts did he carry? Ben stood nearby, arms crossed, watching Eli with hawk-like eyes. The boy's suspicion hadn't faded, but curiosity crept in. Eli paused, holding out the axe. "Blade's dull. Won't cut clean," Ben shrugged, his voice guarded. "Always been that way." "Tools serve better when you tend them," Eli said. He knelt, showing Ben how to sharpen the blade with a whetstone, his hands patient, deliberate. Ben leaned in, despite himself, his young face softening as he traced the gleaming edge. By supper, he carried the axe with a new pride. Though he didn't thank Eli. Clara saw it. Though, the first crack in Ben's walls. Sophie was different. Trailing Eli like a shadow, her questions endless. "Why do birds sing at dawn? How do you tie a knot that won't slip?" Eli answered simply, never brushing her off. One afternoon, he showed her how to make a rabbit snare from twine. Her eyes widened as she tested it. "Does it hurt them?" she asked, her voice small. "It's quick," Eli said gently. "Kinder than hunger." Sophie nodded, her face solemn, as if entrusted with a sacred truth. Clara watched from the garden, her hands in the cold earth, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and fear. Sophie's trust was a gift, but it made her vulnerable. That night, as the children slept, Clara sat mending a torn sleeve by lamplight. Eli whittled a wooden horse, his knife stroke steady. The silence was thick, heavy with unspoken truths. Clara set her needle down. "You carry more than a wound, Eli," she said softly. "If you're under my roof, I should know what it is." Eli's hand paused, the horse half-formed. He looked at her, his blue eyes clouded with pain. For a long moment, he was silent, as if weighing the cost of truth. Then he spoke, his voice low. "I had a wife, Nia, a daughter, Lila. They're gone. My brothers wanted my father's land. They cut the wagon's axle. It fell into a ravine. I buried them in the snow with my own hands." Clara's breath caught, her eyes stinging. She saw the grief in his face, raw and unhealed, and it echoed her own. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "No words can hold that loss." Eli's jaw clenched. "Sorry doesn't bring them back. I failed them. I was supposed to protect them." Clara rose, moving to the fire, her face lit by its glow. You didn't fail, she said firmly. You loved them. You buried them with devotion. A man can't stop a storm, Eli. He can only hold on to those he loves as long as he can. Eli looked at her, his eyes softening, the hardness cracking like ice. Clara took a breath, her own truth rising. I know loss too. My husband Jacob was proud, too proud to admit he couldn't pay our debts. He drank to forget, but the debts didn't forget him. He left me with 2 children and a ledger heavier than any grave. I swore I'd never trust another man, never let my children rely on someone who might vanish. But you've shown them patience, kindness, things I thought were gone. Eli leaned forward, his voice a whisper. I thought I'd leave when I could walk, but here I'm breathing again. Still, my brothers walk free. I can't let their crime stand. Clara's heart sank, fear and hope warring within her. And if you go? If I live, I'll return. To you, to them. She took his hand, her grip firm. Don't promise what you can't keep. Just live. He squeezed her hand, his touch warm and steady. It wasn't love, not yet, but a bond forged in firelight, in shared scars. Clara's heart beat hard, a fragile hope stirring, and she prayed not for love, but for the strength to face whatever came next. The cabin had settled into a fragile rhythm, Eli's presence weaving into the daily grind of chores, splitting wood, mending fences, tending the stove. But peace was a fleeting guest in the valley. One afternoon, hoofbeats shattered the quiet, sharp and ominous against the snow. Clara stepped to the doorway, her heart tightening like a fist. 3 riders approached, led by Vance, a banker with a mustache that curled like his cold smile. His coat was too fine for the frontier, his eyes sharp as knives. Mrs. Hensley, Vance called, dismounting. The bank's been patient. Too patient. Your debts are past due. Clara's stomach sank, but her voice was steady. I'll find a way. Vance's gaze flicked to Eli, who stood silently in the doorway, his face unreadable. Your hired hand? Vance asked, his tone mocking. He's no concern of yours, Clara said, stepping forward to block his view. Vance smirked. 30 days, or we take the land. The railroad wants this valley, and they pay better than you ever will. He mounted his horse, leaving hoofprints and dread in his wake. That night, supper was heavy with silence. Ben ate slowly, his eyes down, his jaw tight. Sophie picked at her bread, her usual chatter stilled. Clara's food tasted of ash, her mind racing with the weight of Vance's threat. She'd fought for this land, for her children's future, but the debts were a noose tightening around her neck. Eli broke the silence, his voice calm but firm. They'll come again. It's my debt, Clara said, her voice sharp. My burden, Eli met her gaze. A shared burden's lighter, her throat tightened. She wanted to ask why he cared, why a man with his own ghosts would shoulder her fight. But his eyes held a truth she recognized, betrayal, loss, the will to survive. You don't know what it means to fight men like Vance, she said softly. Eli's face darkened. I know what it means to fight brothers. The words hung between them, heavy with his unspoken story. Clara felt a pang of fear, not for herself, but for what Eli's past might bring to her door. She thought of Ben, watching Eli with guarded eyes, and Sophie, who trusted him without question. Her heart ached with the need to protect them, but also with the growing realization that Eli was part of their lives now, whether she willed it or not. That night, as the children slept, Clara sat by the fire, her hands idle, her mind restless. She thought of Jacob, his promises broken by pride and whiskey. She thought of Eli, his quiet strength, his vow to return. Fear and hope tangled in her chest, and she prayed, not for safety, but for the courage to trust again, to believe in a man who carried his own wounds. Eli lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams. Memories of Nia and Lila flooded him, their laughter, their warmth, the snow that buried them. Rage burned, but guilt was heavier. Could he have saved them if he'd ridden closer? If he'd seen his brother's betrayal sooner? He pressed his fists to his temples, forcing the thoughts back. In the dark, he heard Clara's soft breathing by the fire, her worry a mirror to his own. He wanted to tell her everything, to unburden his heart, but the words stayed locked inside. The wind moaned outside, and Eli felt the weight of a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. At dawn, Eli packed what little he had, a knife, a water skin, bread Clara wrapped in cloth. Her hands lingered as she tied the knot, her eyes searching his. "You don't have to go," she said, her voice low, almost a plea. "I do," Eli said. "My brother's crime can't stand. Not while I breathe." Sophie clung to his leg, her doll pressed between them. "Will you come back?" she asked, her voice trembling. Eli knelt, resting a hand on her hair. "If I can draw breath, little one, I'll come back." His heart ached at her trust, so like Lila's, and he prayed he wouldn't break it. Ben stood by the door, his hatchet at his belt, his face unreadable. "You kept your word to live," he said quietly. "That's enough." Eli nodded, respect passing between them. Clara stood on the porch, her children beside her as Eli stepped into the snow. He turned once, meeting her eyes, and gave a small nod. Then he walked on, the snow swallowing his trail, his heart heavy with the promise he carried. The trail to the Navajo settlement was long and cold, the mountains looming like judges. Eli rode alone, his ribs bound tight, his thoughts a storm of grief and resolve. The land was familiar, the ridges, the rivers, the bones of his youth, but it felt alien now, stained with betrayal. When he reached the settlement, silence greeted him. Dogs barked, then quieted. Women paused, children stared, whispers rippling like wind through grass. They thought him dead. A ghost returned. In the council lodge, Torin and Kyle argued over their father's land, their voices sharp with greed. Eli pushed open the door, the smell of smoke and cedar heavy in the air. Torin rose, his eyes widening. "You!" he hissed. "Ghost or man?" "Man enough," Eli said, his voice steady. He laid the broken axle by the fire, its cuts gleaming in the light. "This killed my wife and daughter." "Your work," Torin sneered, but Kyle's shoulders sagged, his eyes falling. "I knew," Kale muttered. "I said nothing, and that silence killed them." The elders stirred, their faces grim. Eli's father, Tahoma, entered, his hair white as frost, his voice thunderous. "Enough." He looked at Eli, his eyes glistening with grief and pride. "You live, my son. I live," Eli said, "but I carry death with me." Tahoma turned to Torin and Kale. "What do you say to these charges?" Torin raised his chin. He was never fit to lead. His family's death was the price of destiny. The council murmured disapproval. Eli's father declared Torin and Kale stripped of their claim, the land and title passing to Eli. But Eli shook his head. "I won't take it. This land holds my family's blood. Let another tend it," his father's voice cracked. "You are my choice." "You leave us weaker." Eli placed the carved horse beside the axle. "I take honor and a promise." Tahoma pressed a silver pendant into his hand, a family token. "Carry our blood wherever you go." Eli walked out, the snow falling lightly, his heart lighter, but not free. He had faced his brothers, spoken the truth. The weight of Nia and Lila lingered, but it no longer crushed him. Ahead lay the valley, a cabin with smoke rising, and a woman with steady eyes who had asked him to live. Spring crept into the valley, the snow melting to reveal patches of brown earth and sprouting grass. The river sang again, its voice sharp with the thaw. Clara worked tirelessly, mending fences, clearing garden beds, but her eyes strayed to the ridge, her heart waiting for a promise she wasn't sure would come. Sophie asked often, "Will he come back, Ma?" Clara answered, "If he can." Ben said nothing, but Clara caught him watching the hills, his jaw set. Life pressed on. They planted beans, hauled water, split wood. Sophie hummed, her songs brightening the air. Ben grew quieter, his movements deliberate, as if bracing for loss. Clara bore it with steady patience, but hope flickered in her chest, fragile as a seedling. One evening in late March, Sophie dropped her laundry basket, shirts spilling into the mud. "Ma, Ben! He's coming!" she shouted, her voice piercing the dusk. Clara stepped onto the porch, flour dusting her hands, her heart pounding. A lone rider crested the ridge, silhouetted against the fading sun. He moved slowly, deliberately, a man returning with certainty. Ben appeared, his eyes wide but controlled. Sophie ran, skirts flying, and threw her arms around Eli as he dismounted. He lifted her, smiling despite his weariness. "You said you'd come back," she said fiercely. "Took the long way, but I did," Eli said, his voice rough with emotion. Ben nodded. "You kept your word." Clara approached, her hands gripping the porch rail. Eli offered a silver pendant, its surface worn but gleaming. "This is my promise not of power but of building with you." Clara pressed it back. "I need you to stay." "I will," he said, his eyes steady. They built together, mending the corral, tilling the garden, raising the children. Neighbors brought gifts, seed potatoes, a chicken, accepting Eli as part of the valley. One evening he planted a cedar sapling, pressing the soil firm. Clara smiled. "Will it take?" "If we tend it," he said. He offered a silver ring. "I'd stand with you as husband, as father, if you'll have me." "Yes," Clara said. Together. They wed under the cedar with neighbors and wildflowers. The valley bloomed, the cabin filled with life. Laughter, work, a family forged from loss. Clara felt not just endurance, but life stirring anew, fragile but real. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of this story. I'm truly glad you stayed with me. Your support means so much. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel so I can keep bringing you more heartfelt stories like this.